The chamber was supposed to echo with the usual speeches, the kind of long-winded exchanges that made headlines only for their noise. Cameras buzzed, reporters scribbled half-hearted notes, and the politician at center stage leaned back in his chair, smirking. He had done this 100 times before, dominating with sound bites, drowning truth beneath arrogance. He adjusted his tie, tapped the microphone, and began his performance. His voice carried the tone of a man who believed the room was already his. "Justice," he sneered, "is on trial here today. And let us be honest, is failed." The crowd stirred. Some nodded. Others looked uneasy. He smirked wider, relishing the control, convinced no one could cut through his armor of words. But then it happened. A single voice, steady and unshaken, broke through the noise. The judge, who had been silent until now, leaned forward, eyes locked on the politician. "One sentence," he said firmly. "Justice does not fail only those who fear it do." The room froze. Silence, heavy and undeniable, fell across the chamber. The politician's grin faltered. His hand, once confidently tapping the desk, stopped mid-motion. For the first time, his eyes betrayed him, blinking, searching for a retort that would not come. Gasps rippled through the audience. The sentence struck harder than any argument, sharper than any statistic, more devastating than any speech. The politician, who had wielded bluster like a sword, found himself disarmed in an instant. The cameras caught it all, the cracking smile, the sudden stillness, the dawning realization that his dominance had evaporated. And those watching, whether in the chamber or behind screens, across the nation, knew they were witnessing something unforgettable. It was not just a rebuttal, it was a thunderclap, a moment where arrogance was pierced by clarity. A single line, spoken with quiet authority, had exposed the fragility of power built on lies. But the real story wasn't only about that sentence. It was about what came after, the ripple effects, the shockwaves, and the way a nation realized that sometimes justice doesn't shout, sometimes it only needs one sentence. Cliffhanger. And as the smirk faded from his face, the world leaned in to see what would happen next. The silence that followed was not ordinary. It was the kind of silence that weighed on shoulders, pressed against walls, and lingered in the air like smoke after an explosion. For the politician, it was suffocating. For the nation, it was electrifying. Why did it matter so much? Because this was not just another chamber, not just another televised proceeding. This was a nationally broadcast hearing where the stakes were enormous: truth, accountability, and the very idea of justice in American life. Millions were watching. Every word, every expression, every pause was being clipped, replayed, and dissected in real time. For years, this politician had built his reputation on spectacle. He thrived on twisting facts into weapons, on turning hearings into theaters of self-promotion. He had smirked through scandals, danced around accusations, and bulldozed opponents with sheer force of personality. And time after time, he walked away untouched, his power intact. But today was different. Today, the stage was larger, the cameras sharper, and the patience of the people thinner. This was not just about him, it was about what his words symbolized. If his performance succeeded again, it would confirm a painful truth: that arrogance could once more triumph over accountability, that power could sneer at justice and get away with it. And yet, one sentence had cracked that illusion. Just one. The judge's words hung in the air, not merely as a rebuttal, but as a challenge. Justice does not fail only those who fear it do. It was a declaration that echoed far beyond the chamber. It framed the entire confrontation not as a petty exchange of insults, but as a test of values. Would truth prevail, or would it once again be buried under arrogance? Inside the chamber, the audience shifted uneasily. Some leaned forward, sensing history. Reporters scribbled frantically, already imagining tomorrow's headlines. Cameras zoomed in closer, capturing every flicker of emotion on the politician's face. The smirk that once commanded attention now looked like a relic of a moment already gone. And outside the chamber, on screens across America, people felt something rare. The sense that the tables might finally be turning. That someone had found the courage, the precision, the one sentence sharp enough to puncture years of bluster. But the real anticipation was not about what had just been said. It was about what would come next. Because the politician was not one to retreat quietly. His pride, His career, his image, all of it was on the line in that instant. Would he lash out? Would he double down? Or would the truth finally corner him with no escape? The stakes had never been clearer. This was not merely a political clash. It was a collision between arrogance and accountability, between the performance of power and the reality of justice. And the outcome would ripple far beyond this one moment, shaping how millions perceived not just this man, but the system itself. The chamber braced, the viewers leaned closer. The politician's lips parted, searching desperately for words. And in that breathless pause, one thing became undeniable. This was no longer just a hearing. It was a reckoning. Cliffhanger. But reckoning has a way of revealing more than anyone expects, and the cracks in his armor were only beginning to show. Long before this hearing, long before the smirk and the silence that followed, the politician had been a master of survival. His rise was not fueled by humility or service, but by bluster, theatrics, and the ability to bend narratives until they broke. To his supporters, he was bold. To his critics, he was shameless. Either way, he had become a figure who thrived in chaos and wielded arrogance like a shield. His story was littered with contradictions. He branded himself as a defender of the people, yet his policies often left ordinary families struggling. He spoke of honor, yet scandals followed him like shadows he could not shake. He preached accountability, yet ducked questions when the spotlight burned too brightly. For years, he had been a paradox untouchable, not because he was flawless, but because he had mastered the art of deflection. In his speeches, he was a performer first and a leader second. He learned early that outrage traveled faster than reason, that insults made better headlines than facts. So he cultivated a persona that thrived on derision. He smirked when opponents spoke, rolled his eyes when pressed for details, and weaponized sarcasm as though it were truth. That smirk, the same one caught on camera in the chamber, had become his trademark, a symbol of untouchable arrogance. But arrogance has an expiration date. The cracks in his armor had begun to show long before this moment. His opponents cataloged his misleading claims. Journalists dissected his contradictions. And whispers spread among his colleagues that his theatrics had crossed the line from entertaining to dangerous. Still, he pressed on, convinced that charisma could outlast accountability. For years it had. Until now. His downfall was seated in the very qualities that once propped him up. Overconfidence had made him reckless. Where others prepared meticulously, he relied on improvisation, assuming his quick tongue and smug delivery would always carry the day. Where others sought allies, he alienated them, convinced he could stand alone. And where others respected the weight of truth, he treated it as clay to be molded. Behind closed doors, his contradictions were even sharper. He promised one group of voters that he would fight corruption, while quietly aligning himself with lobbyists whose interests ran counter to his rhetoric. He vowed transparency while withholding documents that could expose his inconsistencies. He railed against elites while basking in the privileges of his position. To those who knew him best, the smirk was not confidence. It was fear disguised as arrogance, a mask hiding how much he relied on performance to stay afloat. And yet, the act worked until it collided with someone unwilling to play the game. That was what made the judge's single sentence so devastating. It cut through years of bluster and exposed the truth. The politician's power was not rooted in substance but in spectacle. And spectacle crumbles when confronted with clarity. The irony was brutal. For years, he had mocked his opponents for lacking wit, for failing to land a blow as sharp as his. But here, in front of cameras, before millions, it was he who found himself speechless. The smirk that had once silenced rooms now betrayed his weakness. His arrogance had written the script of his own downfall. He believed he could not be touched, that his smirk was stronger than any fact, that performance could always defeat principle. But arrogance cannot protect forever. The expiration date had arrived, and in that chamber, with one sentence, the mask slipped. Viewers saw not a titan of politics, but a man cornered by the very justice he had mocked. For years he had wielded words like weapons. Now, words had become his undoing. Cliffhanger. But if arrogance had set the stage for his collapse, then the story of who stood against him, who dared to strike back, was just beginning to unfold. Before the cameras, before the viral moment, before the sentence that silenced the politician, there was a long road of grit, sacrifice, and unshakable principle. The protagonist, a judge whose reputation now stood taller than the chambers themselves, was not born into privilege. Their story began far from marble halls and velvet seats of power. It began in a modest home, where the lessons of integrity were taught not in lofty speeches, but in quiet acts of endurance. Their parents worked long hours, instilling discipline and fairness as the cornerstones of life. From an early age, the protagonist was drawn to truth, not the flashy kind wrapped in slogans, but the kind that lived in small details. In school, when classmates twisted stories to escape consequences, they were the one who insisted on setting things straight. Teachers saw in them a seriousness beyond their years, a refusal to let arrogance masquerade as authority. Law was not a career choice. It was a calling. The path was brutal. Nights hunched over thick casebooks, days juggling part-time jobs to pay tuition, and countless moments when exhaustion whispered the temptation to quit. But quitting was never an option. Justice was not just a concept. It was the lifeline that carried them through each struggle. Where others pursued prestige, the protagonist pursued purpose. Their early career was defined not by fame but by service. Public defender, advocate for the voiceless. Tireless fighter in cases that paid little but mattered immensely. While peers chased lucrative firms and high-profile clients, the protagonist walked into courtrooms filled with people society often ignored. The wrongly accused, the powerless, the ones steamrolled by the system. These years carved resilience into their very being. Every case, every file, every weary client reinforced a singular truth. Justice was not about winning, it was about protecting dignity. It was this philosophy that eventually drew them into higher positions. Their rulings became known for clarity and compassion. Their courtroom was not a stage for grandstanding, but a place where truth was stripped of theatrics. Lawyers who relied on bluster often found themselves unraveling under the protagonist's steady gaze. Facts mattered, integrity mattered, respect mattered. But what set them apart was not only knowledge of the law. It was presence. A presence that demanded accountability without shouting, that commanded respect without arrogance. In a world where politicians and performers thrived on noise, the protagonist's power was silence, the kind that made liars stumble, the kind that turned smirks into stammers. This reputation reached beyond the courthouse. Students sought their mentorship. Journalists quoted their rulings as models of clarity. Even critics, though they disagreed with decisions, admitted the protagonist could not be accused of bias or cowardice. Every action reinforced the image of someone unwilling to bow to spectacle. And so, when the politician, infamous for sarcasm and swagger, stepped into their courtroom, the collision was inevitable. The protagonist knew his type. They had seen men and women like him before, those who mistook charm for character, who relied on performance instead of principle. But this was no ordinary trial. This was an arena broadcast to millions. The politician's smirk was not just for the room, it was for the nation, a challenge to truth itself. Yet the protagonist did not flinch, they never did. Years of preparation, hardship, and devotion had forged an armor stronger than arrogance. Where the politician thrived on twisting words, the judge thrived on distilling them. Where the politician laughed at accountability, the judge embodied it. And in that chamber, the two forces collided: arrogance versus principle, performance versus presence, bluster versus justice. When the sentence came, short, piercing, irrefutable, it was not simply a retort. It was the culmination of a lifetime. Every long night of study, every battle for the powerless, every refusal to let theatrics dominate truth. The words that silenced the smirk carried the weight of decades of discipline. That was why it landed so hard. It was not just a clever comeback. It was a verdict. The politician's expression changed, but so did the audience's. Viewers at home, used to watching arrogance win airtime, suddenly saw the opposite. They witnessed what it looked like when principle triumphed over performance. In that moment, the protagonist was not just a judge. They became a symbol of what justice could be when wielded without fear. Their story made the sentence possible, and their sentence made the story unforgettable. Cliffhanger. But the drama didn't end with that one line. Because as the smirk disappeared, the politician's desperate scramble to recover would only deepen the spectacle and the stakes. The silence after the judge's piercing sentence was electric. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if time itself had paused. The politician's trademark smirk faltered, his eyes darting, searching for a way to claw back control. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of discomfort, every twitch of forced composure. The audience in the chamber leaned forward, holding their breath. Then, like a cornered actor desperate to salvage a scene, the politician lashed back. He chuckled too loudly, too forced, and wagged his finger across the room. "Is that it?" he sneered. "One line? That's your big moment?" The attempt at mockery rang hollow. Even through the television screens, viewers could sense the shift. The balance of power had tilted. But the politician was not about to surrender. He raised his voice, layering sarcasm over each word, hoping volume could cover weakness. "You sit there on your bench, pretending you are above it all," he spat. "But the people know. They know I speak for them. I am not afraid to tell the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes the so-called elite." His words echoed, but they did not land. Because in that courtroom, truth was not what you declared, it was what you proved. The judge's face remained unmoved. No raised eyebrow, no sharp intake of breath. Just calm, steady, watching, and then, with the kind of precision that only comes from years of cutting through bluster, the judge spoke again. "Truth," the judge said softly, "is not measured by how loud you shout it, but by whether it survives the facts." The audience stirred. Pens scribbled furiously. Cameras cut to the politician, whose smirk was now gone entirely. His jaw tightened. He leaned forward, trying to dominate the space, voice climbing in pitch. "You think you can embarrass me? You think one clever sentence makes you the hero of the people? No, I have stood before bigger stages than this. I have faced tougher critics than you, and I will not be silenced." But the judge did not try to silence him. Instead, they let him speak, let him unravel. Let him shout into the silence until his words echoed against the very walls that were closing in. And then, when his ranting left him gasping for breath, the judge's reply sliced through the chaos with surgical calm. "Your words do not silence you," the judge said. "Your actions do," the room erupted. Gasps, whispers, the sharp intake of collective realization. Even those inclined to side with the politician could not ignore the weight of that line. The politician scrambled. He pointed fingers, accusing the court of bias, the media of twisting his image, the system of conspiring against him. He invoked slogans, tried to wrap himself in the flag, tried to cloak arrogance as patriotism. But the more he ranted, the clearer the contrast became. On one side, a flustered man scrambling to defend his image. On the other, a steady judge anchored in dignity and fact. This was not a clash of egos. This was the exposure of weakness dressed up as strength. The judge leaned forward, slightly not aggressive, but resolute. Their voice was calm, but each word carried the force of a gavel. "You have mistaken performance for principle. You have mistaken attention for respect, but respect is not demanded. It is earned. And right now, what you are earning is pity." The words struck like lightning. The chamber was alive with the shock of it. The politician froze, his face paling as the cameras recorded every humiliating second. He tried to laugh it off, but the laughter broke halfway. He tried to interject, but the judge did not give him the oxygen. They continued, each sentence landing heavier than the last. "The people deserve honesty," the judge declared. "Not theater, not insults, not half-truths crafted to spark applause. They deserve leaders who can face facts without flinching. And when you are confronted with facts, you flinch. Every time." By now, the audience was no longer neutral observers. They were witnesses to a dismantling. The politician, once master of the smirk and the soundbite, now sat exposed. His hands twitched. His eyes darted to the cameras as if begging for them to cut away. But the cameras did not cut. They stayed. They lingered. They immortalized the unraveling. And then came the moment, the definitive mic drop. The judge, voice steady and unwavering, delivered the line that would dominate headlines, hashtags, and highlight reels for weeks to come. "One sentence can reveal a man's truth, and yours has already been written by your arrogance." The chamber went still. Then the reaction thundered. Gasps, murmurs, some even applauding despite the courtroom's decorum. Online, the clip would spread like wildfire within hours. The politician sat there, silent now, stripped of his armor of sarcasm and swagger. His smirk was gone. His performance had collapsed, and in its place stood a truth he could not escape. Cliffhanger, but the shockwaves from that moment didn't stop in the chamber. They exploded across the nation, turning a single sentence into a rallying cry. The air inside the chamber had already shifted. The politician, once buoyed by arrogance and a smirk, now sat visibly rattled. His shoulders stiff, his jaw clenched, his eyes darted as if searching for an escape hatch. Cameras zoomed closer, eager to capture every flicker of his unraveling. But the judge was not finished. What had begun as a single devastating sentence was about to unfold into a full dismantling, a counterattack so precise, so undeniable, that it would ripple far beyond the walls of that courtroom. The judge's tone remained calm, deliberate, but the words carried the force of a thunderclap. "You stand here demanding respect," the judge said evenly, "but respect is not demanded, it is earned. And your actions, not your rhetoric, tell the story of who you are." The politician attempted to interject, his voice cracking slightly. This is a setup. You do not speak for the people, I do. I have the votes, I have the support." The judge raised one hand, not to silence him with force, but to cut through his bluster with composure. Support built on deception is not strength, it is sand. And when the tide of truth comes in, it washes away. Gasps spread through the audience. Some covered their mouths, others leaned forward, knowing they were witnessing history. The politician tried again, louder this time, his voice tinged with desperation. "You cannot lecture me. You sit on that bench pretending you are untouchable, but I face the people every day. They cheer me. They believe in me." The judge tilted their heads slightly, eyes steady, voice unwavering. "The people do not cheer lies. They cheer the hope that one day someone will tell them the truth. And that truth is what you fear most." It was surgical. Every sentence cut deeper, exposing the contradictions the politician had long cloaked in bravado. The crowd inside the chamber shifted again, some shaking their heads, others nodding in agreement, and then the judge leaned forward. The moment stretched, cameras clicking, lights glaring. This was the pivot, the crescendo. "Do you want the truth?" the judge asked softly. The room fell silent. Even the politician, chest heaving from his tirade, froze. The judge continued. "The truth is this: your legacy will not be written by the speeches you gave or the applause you forced. It will be written by the lies you could not outrun. And that is why one sentence, one undeniable fact was enough to strip away your performance today." The words echoed like a verdict. The politician's face drained of color. He attempted a laugh, but it faltered, brittle and hollow. He slammed his hand on the table. "This is political theater," he barked. "I will not be humiliated by a single sentence taken out of context." But the more he protested, the clearer his weakness became. His words, once sharp, now sounded defensive. His gestures, once commanding, now seemed frantic. He was a man cornered not by the judge, but by the truth he could no longer spin. And the judge delivered the final strike. "You call this theater," they said, voice calm as stone. "But the difference is, in theater the audience knows it is watching a performance. Here they believed you." Until now, the chamber erupted. A low murmur swelled into audible gasps. Some clapped, unable to contain themselves, while others simply sat in stunned silence. Reporters scribbled furiously, already drafting the headlines. "Justice shuts down politician with one sentence." The politician slumped back, his eyes narrowing as though he could will the cameras away, but they stayed. They captured every moment of his humiliation, and then silence. The judge did not gloat, did not add flourish. They simply sat back, their point made, their authority unquestionable. It was the perfect mic drop. The audience knew it. The journalists knew it, and soon the entire nation would know it. Within hours, the clip would spread across every social media platform, trending with hashtags like #OneSentenceTruth and #JusticeMicDrop. Memes would circulate of the politician's smirk dissolving into panic. Commentators would replay the moment endlessly, dissecting the sentence that stripped away his facade. But inside that chamber, in real time, the weight of the moment was already clear. This was no longer just a political clash. It was a moral reckoning. The politician, visibly shaken, tried to salvage what remained of his pride. "You may have your moment now," he muttered, voice low but still caught on the microphones. "But this fight is far from over," the judge replied, calm and unshaken. "Fights built on lies always end the same way alone." The words lingered. Not shouted, not forced, just delivered with the kind of quiet certainty that made them undeniable. And in that silence the politician had nothing left. The cameras pulled back, framing the two figures in stark contrast, one composed, steady, embodying dignity, the other deflated, exposed, a once confident smirk now reduced to silence. The debate, the performance, the grandstanding, it was all over. What remained was a single sentence, a truth so sharp it had pierced through arrogance and left it in ruins. Cliffhanger. But while the chamber was stunned into silence, the outside world was about to erupt because the ripple effects of that one sentence would reach far beyond those four walls. Outside the chamber, the world was already shifting. Clips of the exchange were being uploaded within minutes. The single sentence from the judge spread like wildfire, short, undeniable, devastating. It was the kind of moment the internet feeds on, and within the hour, it was everywhere. On Twitter, hashtags erupted. Hashtag #OneSentenceTruth, hashtag #JusticeMicDrop, hashtag #SmirkNoMore. Users shared the clip with captions like, "This is how you hold power accountable," and one sentence destroyed years of lies. Some replayed the moment in slow motion, zooming in on the exact second the politician's smirk dissolved into shock. Others added dramatic soundtracks, turning the exchange into viral edits that spread faster than any campaign speech ever could. Instagram Reels and TikToks were flooded with reactions. Teens posted duets, wide-eyed, mouthing along to the judge's words. Political commentators stitched the video, pausing after the sentence to shake their heads in disbelief before declaring, "This right here is history." Cable news caught on quickly. Anchors replayed the clip again and again, their voices carrying a mix of awe and astonishment. "Rarely do we see a takedown so swift, so clean, so irrefutable," one commentator said, gesturing at the replay behind them. The judge's single sentence may go down as one of the most unforgettable moments in modern political history. But it was not just pundits and journalists who felt the impact. Ordinary people, who had long felt invisible in the political spectacle, suddenly felt seen. In neighborhoods across the country, families gathered around their phones and laptops to watch. Parents told their kids, "This is why truth matters." Workers on break huddled around one device, shaking their heads and laughing in disbelief at the politician's unraveling. The clip was not just entertainment, it was validation. Comment sections exploded with stories. One person wrote, "I have sat in meetings with bosses who lied like that politician and no one ever called them out. Watching this judge do it with one sentence gave me chills." Another said, "For the first time in a long time, I feel like justice actually spoke for us." Memes crystallized the moment into cultural shorthand. A still frame of the politician's face mid-smirk, captioned, "Before the sentence," was paired with his stunned expression captioned after the sentence. One meme simply read, "Lie, 0, truth, 1. Even celebrities chimed in. A-list actors, musicians, and comedians reposted the clip with their own commentary. A famous comedian tweeted, "That judge deserves an Emmy for that delivery." A pop star posted it on Instagram with the caption, "Dignity always wins." Overnight, what had started as a tense courtroom moment became a cultural event. And the politician? He tried to fight back. His team issued statements claiming the judge was biased, that the exchange was taken out of context, that the media was exaggerating, but none of it landed. Every attempt to explain away the humiliation only made the viral clip spread faster. The public had already chosen the version of events they believed, the one that spoke to their frustrations, their longing for accountability, their hunger for truth. By the end of the week, late-night hosts were using the clip in their monologues, reenacting the scene with exaggerated smirks and thunderous mic drop gestures. Protesters outside rallies held up signs with the judge's sentence printed in bold letters. Merch vendors even began selling T-shirts emblazoned with the words, "One sentence changed everything." But perhaps the most telling ripple came from young people. In classrooms, students quoted the line in debates. On college campuses, posters appeared with the phrase, painted in bold strokes like a call to action. To them, it was more than a courtroom exchange. It was a rallying cry that truth, even spoken quietly, could dismantle power. The politician's reputation, once untouchable, began to crumble under the weight of that single viral moment. Donors pulled back, allies distanced themselves. Poll numbers sank. And all because of one sentence, a reminder that arrogance can collapse in seconds when confronted by undeniable truth. What started inside four walls had become a national reckoning. Cliffhanger. But the story did not end with the laughter, the memes, or the headlines. Because what lingered was not just the politician's humiliation, it was the deeper lesson the judge had etched into history. In the days that followed, the noise of the internet slowly gave way to something deeper. Beneath the hashtags and memes, a quieter truth began to resonate. People were not only entertained, they were moved. That one sentence, delivered with calm precision, carried more weight than hours of arguments or stacks of documents ever could. Because what it revealed was simple, undeniable. Dignity will always outlast arrogance. The politician had relied on bluster, on volume, on showmanship. But in the end, a single measured phrase unraveled him. It was a reminder that facts do not need to shout. They do not need theatrics. They only need to stand. For many, the moment became symbolic of something bigger than politics. It echoed in homes where parents taught their children the difference between bragging and honesty. It rippled through workplaces where ordinary people faced leaders who thrived on intimidation. It reminded citizens who had grown weary of empty promises that truth still has power even when spoken softly. The judge's words were replayed not just because they were sharp, but because they carried integrity. They embodied a kind of courage that felt rare, courage rooted not in confrontation for its own sake, but in service to the public good. People felt, perhaps for the first time in a long while, that someone with authority had spoken on their behalf without fear, and the lesson was not limited to politics. It transcended parties, ideologies, and divides. It was about the human need for accountability, about the universal relief of seeing arrogance punctured by truth, about the dignity that comes when power is reminded it cannot rewrite reality. In that moment, America remembered something it had almost forgotten. The powerful may control the stage, but they cannot control the truth. Lies can dominate headlines, spin can fill speeches, but eventually, reality breaks through sometimes in just a few words. That is why the clip felt like more than entertainment. It was a moral compass in motion. It reassured people that no matter how long arrogance reigns, it carries an expiration date. That dignity, patience, and integrity still hold the final word. And so, the sentence became a kind of torch passed from one voice to millions. It told viewers, you do not have to be loud to be strong. You do not have to be cruel to be powerful. Sometimes, all it takes is one clear truth spoken at the right time to change the conversation forever. Cliffhanger into outrow. And as the clip continued to circle the globe, one headline captured it best. Justice slams politician with one sentence. But beyond the headline, a larger movement was already unfolding. And that is why this moment will be remembered not just as a courtroom exchange, but as a turning point. One sentence stripped away the arrogance of a politician who thought he could bend reality to his will. One sentence reminded the nation that truth does not need to roar to be heard. It only needs the courage to stand. This was more than a viral clip. It was a message to every person who has ever been talked over, dismissed, or underestimated. Dignity will always outlast bluster. Integrity will always outshine arrogance. And when the moment comes, justice has a way of speaking louder than any lie. The title says it all. Justice slams politician with one sentence. But behind those words is a call for all of us to stand for truth in our own lives, to refuse to be silenced by intimidation, and to carry forward the belief that honesty still matters. If this story moved you, if you felt the same spark of hope watching arrogance collapse under the weight of truth, then you are part of this community. A community that believes dignity wins. A community that shares stories like this not just for entertainment but for inspiration. So here is the invitation. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that truth still has power. Subscribe to this channel for more moments where dignity triumphs over arrogance, and where voices of integrity rise above the noise. And most importantly, add your voice to the movement. Because when millions refuse to be silenced, when millions choose to stand with truth, that is when history changes.